The hull groaned under the strain as reality itself seemed to fracture around them. Flashing crimson lights bathed the bridge in an eerie glow, and the acrid scent of burning circuits filled the air. Captain Rael Vex gripped the navigation console, his knuckles white as the ship's AI voice crackled through the chaos. Temporal breach detected. Unauthorized entry into the Chrono Zone. A distorted voice cut through the static, cold, mechanical, final. You have crossed into forbidden territory. Turn back or face erasure. First Mate Kira shot Rael a sharp glance, her fingers already dancing across the weapons array. We knew the risks, she muttered. Behind them, the engineer Torres cursed as another console sparked to life with warnings. No turning back now, Rael growled, slamming his fist on the thrusters. The ship lurched forward, tearing deeper into the fractured time stream as the alarms wailed like a chorus of doomed souls. Somewhere beyond the chaos, the echoes of 1,000 erased timelines whispered their warnings, but the Time Raiders had never been good at listening. The vault doors hissed open with a sound like time itself, exhaling slow, deliberate, deadly. Vex's boots barely made a sound against the polished obsidian floor, his breath steady despite the adrenaline humming through his veins. Around them, the temporal vault hummed with energy, its walls lined with shimmering containment fields holding artifacts from 100 doomed eras. But their target glowed at the center of the chamber, the Chrono Core, suspended in a stasis bubble, its surface pulsing with unstable chronal energy. Lasers in 3, 2, Torres' voice crackled in their earpieces as the first crimson grid flickered to life, slicing the air with surgical precision. Vex dropped low, sliding beneath a shifting beam as Kira flipped over another, her movements a blur of practiced grace. The air smelled of ozone and something older, like the breath of history itself holding its breath. A time-locked guard materialized in their path, its form flickering in and out of existence, rifle raised. Kira didn't hesitate. Her temporal disruptor whined, sending a pulse that unraveled the guard's stability mid-shot, reducing it to scattered seconds. Nice shot, Vex muttered, already reaching for the core. His gloves brushed the stasis field and the chamber shuddered, a deep, resonant groan as if the universe had just flinched. The core burned cold in his hands. This is our ticket to fixing the past, Vex whispered, watching its light refract against his scars. Kira's grip tightened on her weapon, her voice sharp. Or destroying the future. Above them, the vault's alarms began their shrill, inevitable wail. The celebration aboard the Echo Marauder was short-lived. Laughter and clinking glasses froze mid-air as the ship's proximity alarms screamed to life. The viewscreen flickered, and one by one, the angular black hulls of Time Enforcement Bureau cruisers blinked into existence around them, materializing not from warp but from the fractured edges of time itself. Jack stood apart, his usual smirk replaced by something colder. His fingers twitched near the temporal relay on his wrist, its glow pulsing in sync with the TB ship's arrival. Kira was the first to move, her disruptor already leveling at his chest. "You," she spat. The word carried the weight of a dozen heists, 100 close calls, all now unraveling at the seams. Vex didn't shout, his voice dropped to a razor's edge, the kind of quiet that comes before a storm. "You sold us out." The core's light flickered against Jax's face, casting his betrayal in jagged shadows. No excuses, no grand speech, just a flick of Jax's wrist. The relay flared, and before a single shot could be fired, he rippled, his body distorting like a reflection in disturbed water. Then he was gone, swallowed by the rift he'd opened, leaving behind only the echo of his final glance, something between pity and triumph. The Echo Marauder shuddered as the TB ships locked target scanners. Torres swore, slamming his fist against the engine console. "Their charging temporal inhibitors will be frozen in a time loop before we can," Vex's mind raced. The core pulsed in his grip, its energy humming through his bones. There was no time for rage, no luxury of shock, only the old calculus of survival. "Kira," he said, throwing her the core with one hand while the other punched coordinates into the nav system. "Override the thrusters, we're jumping blind." Outside, the TB ships glowed with gathering chronal energy, the space between seconds stretching thin. The last thing Vex saw before the engines roared was the faintest shimmer, Jax's rift still hanging in the air like a taunt. Or a promise. The engines screamed as the Echo Marauder tore through the time stream, its hull vibrating like a plucked wire. For a heartbeat, everything went white. Then the world reassembled itself in jagged, impossible pieces. Vex's stomach lurched as gravity twisted. Outside the viewport, Earth hung in ruins, its continents splintered into floating islands adrift in a sky veined with fractures. Cities dangled upside down beneath colossal rock formations, their skyscrapers pointing toward an abyss where the ocean should have been. The air itself shimmered, thick with the ozone sting of unraveling physics. Kira's voice cut through the static, the core's destabilizing reality faster than we thought. Her fingers flew over the scanner, pulling up holographic readouts that flickered with error symbols. Every second we hold it, this timeline fractures further. Vex tightened his grip on the core, its light seeping between his fingers like liquid time. The weight of it wasn't just physical, it pressed against his bones, humming with the echo of 1,000 collapsing futures. "Then we fix it before it's too late," he said, though the words tasted hollow. Fixing meant choices, sacrifices, the kind he'd spent a lifetime running from. Torres spat a curse as the ship's systems stuttered. "We've got company." On the scanner, distorted signatures blinked into existence, not ships but things, half-formed and flickering like badly rendered footage, temporal echoes. Ghosts of people and objects caught between layers of broken time. One moment, a phantom warship loomed ahead, its cannons glowing. The next, it dissolved into a storm of pixels. Kira armed the disruptors. They're drawn to the core like moths to a flame. A shadow passed over the sun, or what was left of it. The star itself had split into 3 jagged fragments, burning unevenly. Below, a floating city crumbled in slow motion, its debris drifting upward as gravity lost all meaning. Vex exhaled. Somewhere in this chaos was an anchor point, a moment in time stable enough to recalibrate the core. But finding it meant diving deeper into the fracture. The ship groaned as he punched in new coordinates. "Hold onto something," he warned, just as the Echo Marauder plunged toward the heart of the storm. The air inside the ruined observatory smelled of dust and ionized metal, thick with the static charge of unraveling time. Vex stepped forward, his boots crunching on fractured glass, then froze. Across the shattered dome, a younger version of himself spun around, pistol drawn. 2 muzzles pointed at each other, 2 sets of eyes widening in recognition. "You," the younger Vex snarled, his face unlined but already hardening with the first scars of betrayal. The pistol trembled just slightly in his grip. "This is some TB trick." Kira's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "We don't have time for this," the loops collapsing. Outside, the sky flickered between night and day, each pulse stripping another layer of stability from the world. Old Vex exhaled slowly. He knew this moment, the heat of rage in his chest, the weight of Jax's betrayal fresh as an open wound. Looking at his younger self was like staring into a fractured mirror, every flaw magnified, every mistake raw and undefended. "You think you're saving anyone," young Vex spat. "Look at you, you're just a thief with regrets." The words stung because they were true. Old Vex's grip tightened on the core. "Regrets mean you learned something," he shot back. "Or do you still think running's enough?" A tremor rocked the observatory. Kira grabbed Tora's arm as a chunk of the ceiling dissolved mid-fall, its atoms scattering across 2 timelines. "Paradox breach," Torres yelled. "We're destabilizing." Young Vex's eyes darted to the core, then back. "You took it," he whispered, horror dawning. "That's why everything's breaking." Old Vex finished grimly. The core's light pulsed between them, casting their shadows in opposing directions. Kira was right. They couldn't change the past. But standing here, face to face with his own stubborn pride, Vex understood the real choice, not to rewrite history, but to outrun it. He tossed the core to his younger self. The world screamed. Light ripped through the observatory as timelines collided, and for one impossible second, Vex saw every version of himself stretched across infinity, all reaching for the same futile redemption. Then the loop snapped shut with a sound like a universe sighing, and the Echo Marauder's engines roared back to life around them. Kira's hand clamped onto Vex's shoulder. "You gave it to him." Vex watched the last fragments of the observatory fade from the view screen. Somewhere in the time stream, his younger self was making the same mistakes. But maybe, just maybe, this time he'd remember the weight of that core in his hands a second sooner. "Not everything has to stay broken," he murmured. The ship hurtled forward, leaving ghosts behind. The comms panel erupted with static before resolving into the gaunt face of Admiral Sykes. His uniform was pristine, his eyes devoid of mercy, a man carved from the cold calculus of temporal law. Behind him, the TB fleet hovered like a swarm of dagger-shaped shadows, their chronal cannons humming at full charge. "Captain Vex," Sykes intoned, his voice dry as tomb dust. "You hold what does not belong to you. Surrender the core immediately or be erased from the timeline. This is your only warning." Kira's fingers hovered over the disruptor array, but Vex didn't flinch. Instead, he grinned, the kind of grin that had preceded every bad decision he'd ever made. "Funny," he said, hefting the core in his palm. Its light pulsed erratically, casting jagged shadows across the bridge. "I don't recall the universe asking for your permission." Sykes' expression hardened. "Then you choose oblivion." The screen went black as the TB ships opened fire, chronal beams lancing toward them in slow-motion ribbons of destruction. Vex didn't hesitate. He slammed the core into the ship's overload port. "Hold onto your guts," he warned, just as the world exploded in blue-white light. The pulse radiated outward in a silent shockwave. TB fighters froze mid-volley, their beams halted like insects in amber. Sykes' flagship hung motionless, caught in the fractured second between cause and effect. Even the stars seemed to hold their breath. Taurus whooped, slapping the console. "We did it." The entire fleet stuck in a time stasis field, but Kira's gaze locked onto the core. Its surface burned blackened cracks, glowing veins of unstable energy spiderwebbing outward. "At what cost?" she murmured. Vex wiped sweat from his brow, his own reflection warping in the core's failing light. "Some rules were meant to be broken," he said, though the words tasted like ash. The bridge lights flickered. Somewhere deep in the ship's bones, metal groaned under the strain of paradox. Sykes' frozen snarl lingered on the viewscreen, a promise suspended, not undone. And the core, it pulsed once, twice, like a dying heart counting down to zero. The air shimmered like heat rising from desert sands, then coalesced into a figure wreathed in tattered strands of time itself. One moment empty space, the next her. The Oracle's robes were woven from what looked like unraveling film reels, fragments of forgotten histories flickering across the fabric. Her voice, when it came, wasn't a sound so much as a vibration in their bones. "You tread the edge of oblivion." Kira's disruptor stayed leveled, though her fingers twitched. "More ghosts," she muttered, but this was no echo. The Oracle's gaze pinned them where they stood, her eyes twin voids where time spiraled inward endlessly. Vex felt the core thrum in his grip, its pulse syncing with the rhythmic collapse of realities beyond the ship's shuddering hull. Outside, the Chrono Zone convulsed continents of fractured timelines drifting like icebergs in a dark sea, colliding, merging, dissolving. The Oracle raised a hand, and for a heartbeat they saw it, a wave of pure nothingness rolling toward them, swallowing stars, eras, possibilities whole. "The time crash comes," she whispered. "All threads unravel, all choices undone." Her form wavered, edges dissipating into golden motes. Only the core can mend the loom. Torres let out a shaky breath. So what? We're supposed to be Time's janitors now. But the joke fell flat. The Oracle's warning hung in the air, thick as the ozone stench of dying physics. Kira's eyes met Vex's, no words needed. The same realization struck them both. Every heist, every narrow escape, every betrayal that had led them here, it wasn't chance. It was gravity. The core had always been pulling them toward this moment, this choice. The Oracle's lips parted one last time. You were never thieves. Her form dissolved, scattering into the air like embers from a burnt page. You were the failsafe. Silence. Then the ship lurched violently as another chunk of the timeline disintegrated behind them, the void howling at their heels. The core's light flared brighter, not a prize anymore, but a detonator counting down. Vex exhaled, looking down at the artifact that had cost them so much. Funny, all this time running from cages, only to find the universe itself was the lock. And them, they held the key. Vex's fingers tightened around the core, its edges biting into his palm as the weight of their impossible choice settled over the bridge. Reset the timeline, he said, voice rough with determination. One clean cut, we undo everything. The Teb, the crash, all of it. The core pulsed in response, its light leaching the color from his skin, making the scars along his knuckles look like cracks in porcelain. Kira didn't move. Her stance was rigid, her silence louder than any protest. When she finally spoke, her words were measured, deliberate. There's no reset. She flicked a file onto the main screen, a string of corrupted code, half-erased logs, and one blinking line of text, directive, Chrono Purge Protocol. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Vex's stomach dropped. That's not possible. He stepped closer, as if proximity could change the truth glowing on the display. The file was ancient, its encryption layers peeled back to reveal schematics. The core wasn't a key. It was a scalpel, designed to sever whole branches of time, not mend them. Torres let out a low whistle. So we've been lugging around a universe killer this whole time. His usual bravado was gone, replaced by something hollow. Kira's jaw clenched. Who fed us this lie? The ship's AI chimed in, its voice eerily calm. Data signature analyzed. Last modification. Agent Jax Theron, Time Enforcement Bureau. The name hit like a plasma round to the chest. Vex's vision narrowed, the bridge suddenly too bright, too still. Jax hadn't just betrayed them, he'd rigged the game from the start. Every heist, every close call, every damn step toward the core had been choreographed. Outside, the Chrono Zone shuddered. A chunk of the void split open, revealing a glimpse of something vast and hungry, the time crash looming closer. Kira's hand hovered over the core. If we activate it now, we're not saving anything, we're choosing who gets erased. The core's glow reflected in Vex's eyes, twin points of fire. Somewhere in the wreckage of his trust, a plan began to form, not to play Jax's game, but to flip the board. He reached for the nav console, inputting coordinates that made Torres blanch. Then we don't activate it, Vex said. We take it deeper. The engines roared to life, not away from the crash, but straight into its heart. The derelict station hung in the void like a corpse picked clean, its docking bay yawning open in silent invitation. Vex cut the engines, letting the Echo Marauder drift the last 100 meters on momentum alone. No lights, no power signatures, just the occasional groan of metal stressed by centuries of neglect. Kira checked her disruptor's charge for the third time. This is too easy, Torres snorted, adjusting his scanner. Yeah, well, so was Jax's betrayal. Look how that turned out. The moment their boots touched the station's deck, the air changed thick with the metallic tang of old blood and something sharper, like ozone after a storm. They moved in practiced silence past gutted corridors where frozen corpses floated in zero-G, their faces locked in final screams, a flicker of light ahead. Voices, Vex signaled halt. Through a cracked viewport, the scene unraveled. Jax standing calm amid a circle of TB enforcers, their rifles trained not on him, but on a massive chrono relay pulsing at the chamber's center. His usual smirk was gone, replaced by a grim focus Vex had only seen once before the night they'd first stolen the core. One of the enforcers stepped forward. "The deal was the relay for your pardon." Jax's fingers danced over the relay's controls. "The deal's changed. You think the Bureau's ready for what's coming. The crash isn't just a fracture, it's an end." His gaze flicked up, suddenly locking onto the viewport, onto Vex. No hesitation, no surprise, just a slow, knowing smile as his thumb pressed the detonation switch. The time grenade hit the deck with a sound like shattering glass. Reality itself peeled back in a spiral of light, swallowing Kira mid-lunge, Tora's curse dying on his lips as he dissolved into pixels. Vex reached for them for anything, but the world tore apart at the seams. Then silence, absolute. When his vision cleared, he was kneeling in red sand beneath twin moons, the ruins of an ancient city clawing at the sky. Alone, Jax's last words hung in the air like a curse. "You don't understand what's coming." Somewhere in the ruins, a clock began to chime. The first thing Vex registered was the smell. Rich earth, wet foliage, the iron tang of something primal. His eyelids snapped open to a sky choked with unfamiliar constellations, their light fractured through towering ferns. His fingers dug into soil that shouldn't exist, each breath thick with humidity. No crash site, no ship, just the distant screech of creatures that hadn't walked the earth for millions of years. His chronometer spat static. The air buzzed with temporal radiation, making his teeth ache. When he tried to stand, pain lanced through his ribs, 3 fractures at least, souvenirs from the station's blast. He was stranded, weaponless in the wrong epoch. But time had a rhythm, and if there was one thing Rael Vex knew, it was how to dance between its beats. Across the shattered time stream, Kira coughed blood into her palm. Neon signs flickered overhead in languages she didn't recognize, their glow reflecting off rain-slick streets stained with anti-temporal propaganda. The buildings leaned like drunks, gravity itself seeming to waver. A squad of augmented enforcers marched past, their faces half erased by flickering hologram masks. She pressed deeper into the alley, her disruptor warm against her thigh. The year, according to a decaying news terminal, 7349. The future was a graveyard dressed in chrome. Toras didn't wake so much as become aware. One moment nothing, the next suspended in a silence so complete it vibrated. No ground beneath him, no sky, just fragments of frozen moments drifting like icebergs, a teacup mid-shatter, a bullet halted inches from a child's face, a kiss never completed. The void between seconds didn't breathe, it watched. His tools were useless here, physics a suggestion, but engineers spoke the language of systems and this place. It had rules, just not the kind written down. Vex's first attempt at fire failed. His second nearly set the entire jungle ablaze. By the third night, he'd carved his message into the curved ivory of a mammoth tusk salvaged from a predator's kill site. Not words, coordinates, a star map only one person would recognize. The tusk would fossilize, the message would endure. Kira found it 6,000 years later, embedded in the wall of a museum labeled Prehistoric Artifact, Unknown Ritual Purpose. Her fingers traced the grooves, the inkling of a plan formed, sharp as the knife she palmed. Some bonds transcended time, some debts demanded payment. And in the void, Toras began counting, not seconds, the spaces between them. The mammoth tusk burned in Kira's hands, its ancient surface pulsing with a light that had no business existing outside a museum display case. 6,000 years of human history separated her from the man who'd carved those marks, yet the message was unmistakable. Vex's signature scrawl, a star chart only the crew of the Echo Marauder would recognize. The museum alarms wailed as she smashed the glass, but the real crime wasn't theft. It was hope. Her fingers flew across the stolen TB relay, rewiring its guts with the desperation of someone who'd spent lifetimes chasing ghosts. Sparks bit into her skin as she fused the device to the tusk, the two objects humming with opposing energies, one built to control time, the other saturated with its passage. The relay's display flickered, temporal lock established, beacon active. Somewhere in the abyss between seconds, Torres felt the pull. The void had no direction, no up or down, but the signal cut through the silence like a blade. His fingers, or the memory of fingers, closed around something solid, a thread, a way back. Vex's world shattered the moment the beacon flared to life. The jungle dissolved around him, ferns and primordial beasts pixelating into blue-white static. He tasted ozone, felt the gut-wrenching lurch of an unscheduled jump. Then concrete under his knees, the acrid stench of engine coolant, and Kira's boot nudging his shoulder. "Took you long enough," she said, her voice rougher than he remembered. Torres materialized mid-curse, his form reassembling atom by atom. "I was counting Planck times," he gasped, gripping the floor like it might vanish. "Do not recommend." The reunion lasted exactly 3 heartbeats before the station's emergency lights bathed them in bloody crimson. A holographic countdown burned above the door, 23, 59, 47. The time crash wasn't coming, it was here. Vex pushed upright, wincing at his half-healed ribs. Kira's beacon had cost them. Her left arm was laced with blackened veins where temporal radiation had seeped in. Torres' pupils were blown wide from void exposure, and his own chronometer was frozen on a date that hadn't happened yet. No ship, no weapons, just the 3 of them and a dying universe. Kira tossed him a disruptor rifle scavenged from a TB corpse. "Jax, alive," Vex spat. For now, Torres pried open a maintenance panel, his hands moving on instinct. "We're in the belly of Psyche's flagship. Chrono relays 1 deck up." He jerked his chin at the countdown. "That's not a timer, it's a progress bar." The pieces clicked. Sykes wasn't trying to stop the crash, he was harvesting it, using the relay to carve a bubble of safety for the Bureau while the rest of time burned. Vex checked the rifle's charge, full just like old times. "No more running," he said, meeting Kira's glare, Torres' grim nod. Outside the door, bootsteps pounded closer. Kira cocked her weapon. "We end this." The countdown hit 23, 58, 12. The door exploded inward. The ventilation shaft groaned under their combined weight, but the sound was swallowed by the low hum of the TB's chrono reactor below. Vex kept his breathing shallow as the grate came loose, revealing the heart of Psyche's operation, a cavernous chamber where fractured timelines flickered like dying holograms above a central control hub. The Admiral stood with his back to them, hands clasped behind him as if admiring a sunset, not the unraveling of existence. "Flawed branches must be pruned," Sykes announced to no one, his voice carrying the quiet certainty of a surgeon. On the main display, timelines collapsed one by one, entire civilizations blinking out mid-sentence, lovers frozen in never-completed embraces. Each erasure made the reactor pulse brighter. Kira's disruptor pressed into Vex's ribs before he could move. "Wait," her glare said. Then Torres' scanner vibrated against his thigh, a single, damning readout. The reactor wasn't just consuming the dying timelines, it was harvesting their energy, siphoning chronal potential into the TB's reserves. Sykes turned then, his smirk widening as though he'd known they'd come. "Ah," the failsafes arrive at last. His boots clicked against the metal grating as he gestured to the displays. "Tell me, Captain, when you prune a diseased branch, do you weep for the leaves?" Kira dropped from the vent first, landing in a crouch with her weapon leveled. "You're playing God." The Admiral didn't flinch. "Someone has to." His fingers danced over a console, and the chamber shuddered as another timeline disintegrated, this one showing a fragment of the Echo Marauder engulfed in flames. A possible past or future. The crash was inevitable. "I'm merely directing the fallout." Vex's grip tightened on his rifle. The pieces fell into place. Jax's betrayal, the Core's true purpose, even the Oracle's warning. They'd been herded here, every heist a step in Psyche's grand design. The reactor's glow painted his scars in molten gold as he stepped forward. You don't want to stop the crash, he realized. You're fueling it. Tora's curse cut through the hum as the scanner confirmed it. The TEB wasn't just surviving the collapse, they were building something. Something that required the raw power of dying timelines. Sykes spread his hands. Evolution demands sacrifice. Outside the station's armored windows, the time crash roared closer, its maw widening like a hungry thing. Vex exhaled, all this time running from cages, and they'd landed in the teeth of a trap with only one way out: forward, into the storm. The air between them shimmered like oil on water. Then the Oracle stood there, not materializing so much as unveiling herself from the fabric of the room. Her robes whispered with the echoes of dead timelines, their edges fraying into golden mist. This time, her voice didn't vibrate in their bones, it hurt. You sought destruction, she murmured, her gaze fixed on the core in Vex's hands. But it was never a blade. Her finger, more a suggestion of a finger, translucent and flickering, pointed to the scars wrapping his knuckles, the ones he'd earned the day Jax's betrayal had rewritten his ribs into shattered monuments. Only hands that no time's teeth can turn the lock. Kira shifted, her disruptor still trained on Sykes' frozen smirk. What lock? The Oracle's lips parted, and for a heartbeat the chamber dissolved. The walls bled away, replaced by an endless corridor of doors, each one pulsing with a different light, a different era. The heart of the Chrono Zone wasn't a place. It was a threshold, and at its center, a vault door carved with runes that pulsed in time with Vex's heartbeat. The vision snapped back as Tora's gasped. That's not a weapon core, it's a damper. His engineer's mind raced ahead, fingers twitching as if tracing schematics in the air. It doesn't destroy timelines, it stabilizes them. Sykes' laugh was a dry crackle, a pretty lie. The Bureau has dissected a dozen cores, they burn. The Oracle turned her void, dark eyes on him. You opened the wrong doors. Her form flickered, strands of her robe unraveling into the air like smoke. The truth hit Vex like a plasma round. The TB hadn't been stealing cores to control the crash. They'd been triggering it, every test, every detonation, another fracture in time's foundation. Kira's grip on her weapon tightened. Then what does this one open? The answer came not in words, but in light. The core's glow shifted from blue-white to something deeper, richer, like molten gold. Vex's scars burned where they touched it, not with pain, but recognition. The Oracle's voice faded as she dissolved into motes of luminance. Ask yourself, thief, she whispered, her breath colder than the void between stars. Why did time choose you? Outside, the crash howled closer. Somewhere in the storm, Jax watched, and the vault door waited. The air in the Chrono Zone's core didn't move so much as shiver, each breath tasting like static and forgotten memories. Vex stepped through the fractured archway first, his boots sinking into ground that pulsed like a living thing beneath him. The walls here weren't metal or stone, they were moments, layers of compressed time stacked like sedimentary rock, whispering in 1,000 overlapping voices. A storm of temporal energy lashed overhead, lightning made from splintered yesterdays and unborn tomorrows. Kira's hand clamped onto his shoulder as another shockwave rippled past, nearly knocking them into a floating pocket of reversed gravity. We're not just inside the zone anymore, she shouted over the roaring paradox winds. We're inside time's wiring. Tora's pointed to the center of the chamber where a spindle of raw chronal energy twisted upward, its light fragmented by the prism of collapsing realities. There, that's the anchor point, the lock the Oracle meant. His voice cracked with something between awe and terror, but we'd need. A wet cough cut him off. They turned as one to see the figure crumpled against a time-frozen boulder, blood pooling dark around him in perfect, motionless spheres. Jax's uniform was more char than fabric now, his left arm ending abruptly at the elbow in a stump still flickering with temporal discharge. His good hand pressed against a wound that seemed to pulse in and out of existence. Vex moved before he could think, dropping to one knee beside the man who'd betrayed them across a dozen lifetimes. Jax's gaze focused with painful effort, his lips peeling back in a grimace that might have been a smile. "Took you long enough." His fingers scrabbled at Vex's wrist, leaving smears of blood that evaporated into golden mist. "Not the core, it's the key, but he knew you'd come." A fresh tremor rocked the chamber, not from the storm this time, from the far end of the vault where the shadows thickened unnaturally. A figure stepped forward, his movements leaving faint afterimages in the air. Same scarred knuckles, same defiant stance, but the eyes, those were different. Hollow, hungry, Torres sucked in a breath. "That's me," Vex finished, staring at his own face 20 years older, the man's coat stitched together from what looked like strips of disintegrating timelines. Future Vex raised a hand, and the temporal storm stilled at his gesture. The core in present Vex's grip flared white-hot as their connection snapped into place, key and lock recognizing each other across the gulf of years. Jax convulsed, his whisper barely audible over the suddenly silent chamber. "Not saving you, warning you." His eyes found Kira's, then slid shut. "Don't become him." The future version of Vex took another step forward, the air around him warping like heat off desert sand. When he spoke, his voice was a chorus of overlapping echoes, each word carrying the weight of centuries. "You always take the core," he said, almost gently, "and the cycle continues." He extended a hand, palm up. "Unless you learn what I didn't." The chamber trembled as the two versions of the same man faced each other across the corpse of a broken friendship, the weight of every stolen moment pressing down on them both. Somewhere beyond the storm, the universe held its breath. The air between them crackled with the weight of fractured time, thick enough to taste like burnt copper. Future Vex didn't blink, his eyes were voids where the light of 1,000 erased decisions had long since drained away. His coat rippled, its patches of stitched-together timelines whispering in discordant echoes. When he spoke, the words weren't just sound, they pressed against the present like a hand around a throat. "You'll join me," he said, not a command, but an inevitability carved into the bones of the universe. His palm opened, revealing a core identical to the one in present Vex's grip, its surface blackened with cracks. "Or you'll become me, there's no third path." The chamber trembled as he stepped closer, his boots leaving faint afterimages on the ground. "Every choice you've made, every betrayal, every selfish win, they all lead here." Kira's disruptor whined as she charged it, but the future tyrant didn't even glance her way. "We don't bargain with ghosts," she spat. Torres stared at the older Vex's hands. The fingers were wrong, too many joints, twisted like they'd been broken and remade too many times to count. "You messed with the core," he breathed. "Didn't just use it, changed it." Future Vex smiled, and it was the most horrifying thing present Vex had ever seen. A smile that knew every mistake he'd ever make. "Had to," the older man murmured. "Time kept breaking, had to stitch it back together my way." Jax's blood had stopped evaporating. It pooled now, impossibly black, his last warning etched in the stillness of his face. "Don't become him." Present Vex felt the core pulse in his hands, not with power but with a question, the same one the Oracle had asked. Why him? Why now? The answer came like a bolt, not because he was a thief, not because he was a survivor, because he was the only one who'd ever looked at the universe's locked doors and asked, what if we stopped picking them? He raised the core, its light slicing through the chamber's gloom. "Not today," he said, and meant it. Future Vex sighed, a sound like continents collapsing. "Spoken," he whispered, "just like I did." Then the vault door exploded inward. The moment stretched thin as the two Vexes locked eyes, one worn raw by centuries of compromise, the other still bleeding from fresh wounds of betrayal. Then the chamber erupted. Future Vex moved first, his twisted fingers flickering like bad reception as he tore a hole in reality itself. The air screamed as temporal shrapnel rained down, each fragment a frozen second ripped from someone else's life. Kira dove sideways, her disruptor barking 3 rapid shots that passed clean through Future Vex's chest only for the wounds to stitch themselves shut with threads of stolen time. He didn't flinch, didn't even blink, just raised a hand and pushed. The force hit Kira like a freight train, slamming her into a wall of crystallized memories where she stuck fast, limbs sinking into the amber like substance. Present Vex barely had time to register Tora's shout before his future self was on him, their faces inches apart. The smell hit first ozone and something worse, like meat left to rot in a vacuum. Future Vex's breath hissed through teeth filed to points. "You'll do it," he whispered. "When Jax dies again, when Kira falls, you'll take the core and bend it until it breaks." His grip burned where it clamped onto Present Vex's wrist, searing through flesh to the bone beneath. A shot rang out, not from Kira's trapped form, but from the shadows. Jax, barely conscious, his pistol trembling but steady. The bullet struck true, punching through the device fused to Future Vex's ribs. The chamber gasped. For one terrible heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Future Vex's form began to stutter, his edges dissolving into jagged pixels. His snarl twisted into something raw and terrified as the paradox took hold. "You can't outrun time," he screamed, the words unraveling mid-air. His body fragmented, timelines peeling away like layers of burning parchment, revealing glimpses of all the men he'd been across the centuries. The betrayer, the martyr, the tyrant. Present Vex stumbled back as the last fragments of his future self dissolved into golden mist, the chamber shuddering with the aftershocks. Kira wrenched free from the memory wall, her gaze locking onto the still smoking core in his hands. The choice wasn't gone, just different now. Somewhere in the ruins of the vault, a clock began to chime. The storm didn't howl, it spoke. The walls of the Chrono Zone peeled back like burned parchment, revealing a maelstrom of eyes and teeth and grasping hands woven from the unraveled threads of discarded timelines. The air itself vibrated with a voice deeper than sound, older than stars. "Prove your worth," it demanded, each syllable cracking reality like glass. Kira's disruptor slipped from numb fingers as the weight of that voice pressed down, not on their bodies, but on their very histories. Every lie, every theft, every selfish victory laid bare in the storm's gaze. Vex stepped forward, his boots sinking into ground that had ceased to be solid. The core burned in his grip, its light a feeble candle against the storm's hunger. He didn't raise it like a weapon, didn't bargain or beg, just opened his fingers and let it hang suspended between them, its glow reflected in the countless eyes watching from the void. "We're done stealing time," he said, the words raw with something too jagged to name. Not regret, not absolution, just the quiet certainty of a man finally seeing the chain he'd been dragging for years. "We'll protect it." For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then the storm laughed, a sound like continents grinding together. The core pulsed once, twice, before the light fractured into 1,000 filaments, each one stitching itself into the raider's skin like liquid fire. Torres gasped as his veins lit up with gold, his engineer's mind recognizing the pattern instantly. "It's not judging us," he choked out, "it's rewriting us." Kira's fingers flew to her chest where the light burned brightest, her breath coming in ragged bursts. The storm didn't speak again, but the meaning was clear. This wasn't forgiveness. It was a deal. The core's power fused with their cells, its weight settling into their bones like a second heartbeat. The price, every stolen moment they'd ever taken, would be paid back tenfold in service. The storm's eyes blinked shut one by one, the chamber reassembling itself around them, not as it was, but as it should be. The fractured timelines knitting together at the edges, the vault door sealing with a finality that echoed in their teeth. Vex flexed his hand, the scars on his knuckles now glowing faintly under the skin. Somewhere beyond the silence, a clock began to chime, not counting down. Not winding back, just ticking. Kira exhaled, rolling her shoulders as if testing the weight of the choice they'd made. "So," she murmured, eyeing the sealed vault. "Where to now, Protector?" The core hummed in answer, its light pulsing toward the stars. The air in the Chrono Zone turned thick with the weight of unspoken debts. The storm raged around them, a living thing tearing at the edges of reality, its hunger palpable. Kira's fingers tightened around the core, its light pulsing erratically as the time stream buckled under the strain. Tora's voice crackled over the comms, raw with static. It's not stabilizing. The zone needs an anchor, something real to tether to. A grim understanding settled over the crew. The Oracle's warning hadn't been a prophecy. It was an invoice. Kira moved first, stepping toward the heart of the maelstrom with the grim resolve of someone who'd spent a lifetime balancing the scales. "I've got the least to lose," she muttered, her boots crunching on fragments of frozen time. But before she could take another step, Taro's hand clamped onto her shoulder, spinning her around. His face was unreadable under the flickering light of dying eras. "The crew needs you," he said, voice steady. "I'm just a mechanic who got lucky." There was no heroism in the words. No grand gesture, just the quiet calculus of a man who knew his worth. Kira's protest died in her throat as Taro shoved her backward, not roughly but with finality. His smile was a fleeting thing, there and gone like a skipped frame. Then he turned and walked into the storm. The zone reacted instantly. Chronal energy coiled around him, tendrils of light and shadow knitting through his limbs like roots through soil. For a single, suspended moment, Taro glowed not with pain but purpose. His body dissolved into filaments of golden light, weaving themselves into the fractured time stream like sutures in a wound. The change was immediate. The storm's roar dulled to a whisper. The floating debris of broken timelines slid back into place, clicking together like puzzle pieces. Even the air felt different, cleaner, as if the universe itself had taken a breath and held it. Kira's knees hit the ground before she realized she'd fallen. The core lay dormant in her palm, its light now a steady, gentle pulse. Tora's hand gripped her shoulder, his usual bravado stripped away. "He knew," he said hoarsely. The whole damn time he knew. Above them, the sky began to heal. Sykes' cruiser tore through the healing time stream like a knife through canvas, its chrono cannons firing wildly even as the ship's hull began to flake away into golden motes. The Admiral's face filled the view screen, his usually immaculate uniform now frayed at the edges literally, as time itself rejected his presence. "You sentimental fools." The words arrived before his lips moved, a side effect of temporal decay. His ship's weapons glowed with doomed energy, primed for one final suicidal volley aimed not at the Echo Marauder, but at the delicate new threads of reality weaving themselves together around them. Kira's hands flew across the console. "Impact in 10 seconds, we can't outrun the blast radius." The ship shuddered as another chunk of Sykes' vessel disintegrated, the fragments not floating away but unhappening, erased from existence backward in a dizzying spiral. Vex didn't reach for the controls, didn't shout orders. He simply watched as the Admiral's furious snarl melted into dawning horror, the moment when Sykes finally understood. The cannons fired, but the energy bolts fractured mid-flight, dispersing into harmless showers of chronal confetti absorbed by the mending timelines. "You've doomed us all," Sykes howled, his form flickering between a dozen possible deaths, crushed, vaporized, withered to dust. Vex leaned forward, his reflection superimposed over the Admiral's dissolving face on the viewscreen. "No," he corrected softly, "we saved you." The words carried the weight of 100 buried grudges, but no triumph, only pity. Sykes' scream cut off abruptly as his ship unraveled into a constellation of golden threads, each one weaving itself back into the fabric of time. The last thing to disappear was his eyes wide with the realization that his precious bureau, his carefully curated timeline, would never exist now. That history would remember him not as a savior, but as a footnote in someone else's redemption. The Echo Marauder hung motionless in the suddenly silent void. No debris, no wreckage, just the quiet hum of engines and the steady pulse of the core, now embedded in the ship's console like a second heart. Kira exhaled hard, her fingers pausing over the navigation array. Where to now? Outside the viewport, the stars glittered, not as fixed points but as possibilities. Vex touched the faint scars on his knuckles, the ones that no longer ached. Anywhere, he said, and meant it. The Echo Marauder drifted through the silence of a newborn universe, its hull still humming with the afterglow of chronal energy. Outside the viewport, stars burned steady and sure no longer flickering between possibilities but fixed in their courses, as if the cosmos itself had exhaled in relief. Vex ran a thumb over the dormant core embedded in the console, its surface cool and smooth like a river stone worn down by centuries of gentle currents. Kira leaned against the pilot's chair, arms crossed, her gaze sharp even in the soft light. "So," she said, nodding at the core. "What now?" A smirk tugged at Vex's lips. Not the old, reckless grin of a thief chasing the next score, but something quieter, settled. "We keep time in line," he said, as if it were that simple. Maybe it was. Torres laughed from the engineering station, his fingers dancing over freshly calibrated systems. "That's it, no grand speech, no for the greater good." Vex shrugged. "Turns out time doesn't need speeches, just people stupid enough to care." The comms crackled to life and a familiar voice, laced with static but unmistakable, cut through the stillness. "You idiots actually pulled it off." Jax's image flickered on the screen, his face half-shadowed, his smirk weaker than it used to be. He wasn't on a Tigby cruiser. Wasn't wearing their colors, just a man in a dim cockpit somewhere between redemption and regret. Kira's hand hovered over the disconnect button, but Vex shook his head. "You got a job to do, or are you just here to gloat?" Jax's grin didn't reach his eyes. "Heard there's a new outfit keeping an eye on time anomalies. Figured you might need someone who knows how the other side thinks." Silence stretched, then Kira snorted. "We'll send coordinates." The screen went dark. Outside, the first streaks of dawn painted the hull in gold and crimson as the Echo Marauder banked toward the horizon. Somewhere below, in a world that no longer remembered the Bureau's grip or the crash's shadow, people were waking up to a day unshackled from the weight of stolen seconds. Vex exhaled, feeling the scars on his knuckles no longer aching, just there. A reminder, a choice. The engines hummed, the stars waited, and time for once moved forward. The airlock hissed open with a sound like a dying breath, and for a moment no one moved. The figure slumped against the bulkhead barely resembled Taro. His hair had gone shock white, his face etched with lines deeper than any mere years could carve. His hands, once steady enough to rewire a quantum drive mid-jump, trembled where they gripped the doorframe. But it was his eyes that stopped them cold, pupils dilated so wide the irises were nearly swallowed, swimming with fractured light like glimpses of 100 drowned timelines. Kira reached him first, her usual razor-sharp reflexes slowed by disbelief. "You," the word choked off as Taro collapsed forward into her arms, his weight nearly dragging them both to the deck. He smelled of ozone and something older, something that curled in the back of the throat like the memory of a forgotten dream. "Time," he rasped, the voice all wrong, scraped raw by echoes of voices not his own. "Gave me back." His fingers clutched at Kira's sleeve, leaving faint streaks of gold where they brushed residue from the chronal threads he'd woven into the zone's fabric. Vex crouched beside them, his usual swagger stripped away. Up close, the truth was worse. Taro's wrinkles weren't just age. They were seams, thin scars where his skin had been stitched back together across gaps in his personal timeline. His left pinky finger ended abruptly in smooth flesh, as if the rest had never existed. The hug was instinctive, a tangle of limbs and shuddering breath. But when they pulled away, Taro's gaze drifted past them to the ship's chrono display. His laugh was a broken thing, still ticking, he whispered, tracing the numbers with a trembling finger. Then his focus snapped to Vex, sharp as a blade. "She's not done with us." Outside the viewport, the stars burned steady. Inside, the air hummed with the weight of what he hadn't said the price time had exacted and the debt still unpaid. Taro's hand closed around a loose wire dangling from the console, his engineer's reflexes kicking in even now. The wire disintegrated in his grip, unraveling into golden dust. No one asked where he'd been. Some secrets are written in the silence between heartbeats. The air around them shimmered like heat rising from desert sands, then thinned, stretched until the oracle stood before them one final time. But she was less substantial now, her form fraying at the edges like a page left too long in the sun. The flickering histories stitched into her robes had dulled, their once vivid scenes fading into faint impressions. When she spoke, her voice carried the hush of a closing book. The zone is awake now. Her gaze drifted beyond them toward the mended timeline stretching into infinity. It will test others. The words weren't a warning, not quite, more like the quiet acknowledgement of a cycle neither she nor they could break, only pass on. Vex studied her fading outline, the scars on his knuckles pulsing faintly in response. Some debts couldn't be repaid, only carried forward. He nodded once, sharp and sure. Let them prove themselves. For a heartbeat, the oracle's lips curved, not quite a smile, but something softer, almost approving. Then the light caught her, and she dissolved into a shower of golden motes that hung in the air like fireflies before winking out one by one. The silence that followed was different than before. Not empty, but alive, charged with the hum of a universe breathing evenly for the first time in centuries. Kira flexed her fingers, the ghost of the core's energy still humming under her skin. She wasn't just a guide, she murmured. She was a filter. Taurus, half buried in the ship's wiring as usual, snorted. Yeah, well, hope the next suckers are better at multiple choice than we were. But his hand stilled on the frayed conduit, his usual bravado slipping just long enough to betray the weight of what they'd survived. Outside, the stars burned steady. The Echo Marauder's engines purred, ready to leap into the black. And somewhere in the vast, unbroken expanse of the Chrono Zone, a new door clicked softly open. The deck of the Echo Marauder hummed underfoot, not from engines or weapons, but from something far older. The quiet resonance of time itself settling into its rightful rhythm. The crew stood in a loose circle around a slab of ore mine from the heart of the Chrono Zone, its surface shimmering with latent energy. Kira held the engraver first, its tip glowing white-hot with chronal fire. She pressed it to the metal, and the ship seemed to hold its breath as the tool bit deep, her name flaring gold before cooling into permanence. No more thieves, Vex said, watching the light dance across their faces. The words weren't just a declaration, they were a reckoning, a choice etched as deeply as the names now being carved. Taurus went next, his usual smirk absent for once. His hands, usually so sure with wires and circuits, trembled slightly as he worked. Funny, he muttered, stepping back to examine his handiwork. Spent my whole life taking things apart. Now we're the glue. The engraver passed to Jack's last. He hesitated, his fingers tightening around the tool until his knuckles matched the white of the chronal flame. The silence stretched thick with unspoken history, every betrayal, every close call, every second chance. Then the flame flared brighter as he leaned in, his name joining the others with a hiss. Vex placed his palm against the finished plaque. The metal warmed instantly, pulsing like a living thing. Time Guardians, he repeated, tasting the weight of the title. It didn't fit yet, not quite, but somewhere in the hum of the ship, in the quiet resolve exchanged between them, it flickered to life, a promise forged in stolen moments and paid back debts. Beyond the viewport, the stars burned steady, no longer prizes to chase but beacons to follow. The deck lurched as the Echo Marauder punched through the time stream, the usual blue-white vortex of the jump drive replaced by something darker, a bruise-colored rift that left static crawling across their skin. The moment the ship stabilized, Jax's voice crackled through the comms, raw with an urgency that cut through the usual sarcasm. He's still out there. The transmission dissolved into a scream of feedback, and the main screen flickered violently before resolving into an image that turned the air to ice. A shadow moved through a ruined lab, its edges smeared like wet ink. The figure, taller than human, limbs jointed wrong, cradled something in its hands that glowed with a familiar sickly light. Shards of the core, painstakingly reassembled, pulsed in its grip like a reassembled heart. The scene stuttered, jumping between moments, the figure welding timelines together with threads of stolen light, a half-built machine humming with the same distorted energy that had nearly unraveled existence once before. Kira's fingers dug into the console. "That's not possible. We saw the core die." Torres swore, pulling up scans that made no sense. The readings weren't just from another time, but from outside time. It's harvesting pieces from erased timelines, like a scavenger digging through a trash heap of dead universes. Vex's reflection in the viewscreen looked older suddenly, the scars on his knuckles glowing faintly as if resonating with the abomination on screen. The figure paused, its faceless head tilting as though hearing a distant sound, then turned. Not toward them, but to them, through the screen, the void where a face should be peeling back to reveal a maw of spiraling teeth. The feed cut out. The silence was worse than the screaming of the time storm. Jax's last words hung between them, heavier now, still out there. The Echo Marauder's engines whined as the ship adjusted course almost on its own, drawn toward the coordinates bleeding through the corrupted feed. Not a choice, a gravity. Outside the viewport, the stars watched, silent as sentinels, waiting. The Echo Marauder's engines roared to life, not with their usual blue-white flare, but with a sound like reality itself tearing at the seams. The Chrono Zone loomed ahead, not a rift this time, but a wound, its edges pulsing with jagged threads of unspooled time. Vex's fingers hovered over the thrusters, the scars on his knuckles glowing faintly as the ship's sensors screamed warnings they couldn't pass. Shadows moved in the distortion, half-formed figures flickering between existence and erasure. Kira strapped into the co-pilot seat, her smirk sharp enough to cut glass. "Last time we did this, we crashed into a paradox." Vex didn't look away from the storm. "Last time we had a choice." The words hung between them, heavy with the weight of what they'd left behind. Taro's hollow eyes, the Oracle's fading whisper, Jax's warning ringing in their ears like a funeral bell. A hand clamped onto Vex's shoulder. Torres, his usual bravado replaced by grim focus. Ships rebuilt to handle chronal shear, mostly. His grin was all teeth. 70% chance we don't dissolve into time soup." The rift yawned wider. Inside, something glinted, a familiar sickly glow, fractured and wrong. Shards of the core stitched back together by hands that had no right to touch it. Vex exhaled. Ready. Kira's fingers brushed the disruptor at her hip. Always, the Echo Marauder plunged forward, vanishing into the storm's maw like a knife into the dark. The last thing the sensors registered before they shorted out was a voice not from the comms, not from the ship, but from the time stream itself. A whisper, half-formed, vibrating through their bones like the first note of an ending. "Welcome back, thieves." The Chrono Zone hums like a living thing, its fractured timelines knitting and unraveling in an endless dance of creation and destruction. Scars still glow faintly where the Echo Marauder once tore through its heart, not as thieves now, but as something harder to define. Guardians, menders. Fools who looked into the abyss and didn't blink. Across 100 worlds, the legend spreads in whispers and static-laced transmissions. How the raiders walked into time's teeth and came back changed. Not heroes, not saints, just people who finally learned the weight of a second. In the ruins of the Bureau's fallen citadel, a child picks up a shattered chronometer, its gears frozen at the exact moment the crash reversed. Somewhere else, an old man tends a grave marked only by coordinates numbers that shift if you stare too long, as if the stone itself remembers too many endings. The stories disagree on details. Was it sacrifice that saved them, a deal struck with something older than time, or just the stubborn refusal of 4 broken people to let go? The Echo Marauder's silhouette fades into the starfield, its hull still thrumming with energy stolen then given back. On the bridge, the crew stands silent, watching the Chrono Zone's pulse through the viewport. No longer a threat, not quite an ally. Just a wound that healed wrong and the hands that stitched it. A whisper curls through the air, too soft to be a voice, too sharp to be imagination. The doors still open. And in the dark between ticks of the clock, something answers.